Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another review from Sci-Li Gaming. As always, I am your host, Sci-Li, and let's get to it. Kickstarter is awesome, isn't it? Bringing us titles like Wasteland 2, Tides of Numenera, Shroud of the Avatar, and so many more. More importantly, it has served as an important platform for consumers to voice what kind of games they want, rather than just the annual titles that seem to perforate the market today. Which brings us to the story of Shadowrun Returns. The consumer has chosen, and Shadowrun has, in fact, returned to us. Shadowrun Returns came to Kickstarter in April of last year with a target funding goal of $400,000. Fans took up the banner, charging past the funding goal and reaching a massive $1.8 million in total backing funds for the project. And thus, the old franchise of man, magic, and machine began its epic quest to return to the forefront of the modern gaming scene. For a while, it seemed as if the traditional turn-based, story-focused RPGs, especially with the funding of Wasteland 2 earlier in the same month, might be making a triumphant return. Well, Shadowrun Returns released on Steam last Thursday, so the question is, does it live up to the standard? I'll be honest, I'm disappointed. Shadowrun takes place in the future, the year 2054 to be exact. Magic is returning to the world, and technology has reached the point of cybernetic enhancements for everyone. Trolls, orcs, dwarves, elves, and humans live alongside one another, facing the bleak promise of a future ruled by huge corporations and dwindling booze supplies together. The player controls a Shadowrunner, which is essentially a mercenary that does the dirty work that the suits and people with money don't want to be tracked back to them. It's pretty gripping, really. Unfortunately, creating said character is rather lackluster. The models in-game are seriously aged-looking. There's a distinct lack of aesthetic customization options. In total, there are 16 hairstyles, 8 for each gender, and the other options boil down to facial hair and skin color. It doesn't help much that all the hairstyles look like plastic, and generally hold a look akin to someone who just went dumpster diving outside of McDonald's. The classes, on the other hand, seem pretty distinct. Players can pick from 6 classes: the Street Samurai, Mage, Decker, Rigger, Shaman, and Physical Adept, all which feature pretty unique styles of play. I personally picked the Shaman for my main character because summoning demons to fight for me seemed pretty cool. Following class selection, the player gets to do the typical allotment of skill points, and then is thrown into the world of Shadowrun. The world, I will admit, is beautifully made. The art style is a great combination of grungy backwater areas clashing with neon futuristic tech. It's nice to walk through, but there's a distinct lack of interaction with much outside of mission objectives. NPCs stand around and will occasionally say something in passing about their situation, but other than that, there seemed very little to really bring the world of Shadowrun to life. I suppose what seemed like the perfect place to allow players to really get into the atmosphere really just ended up being a stage that the player was forced to run across to the next objective. On the other hand, Shadowrun is a story-driven RPG, which means a lot of dialogue. A lot of dialogue. For each character the player can actually interact with, there are several paths of conversation, ranging from the typical tell me what it is, why, and where I need to go, matter-of-fact approach, to the this is Drek and you can shove it up yours, roguish criminal who takes crap from no one. The characters all have wonderfully drawn portraits that are rich with detail, but the conversations, given the rather linear nature of the whole story, felt rather empty. Other than feeding me the information on what I needed to do, I never really felt a connection to the characters around me. Which leads to another point. The lack of connection to any of the characters really stifles the narrative. I cared little if someone around me died horribly. It didn't seem to have consequences in the greater narrative anyway. After going through a small novella of dialogue, flavored with words which I didn't understand, which the game thoughtfully includes a dictionary for the more outlandish of them, the player is introduced to combat, which is terrible. The game functions on a turn-based tile combat system. The player is given a certain amount of action points and then uses them to perform attacks, move, use items, etc. This is not something that is new to the turn-based genre, but rarely have I seen it done in such a way to make combat almost painful to take part in. Playing as a shaman, I can safely say that the summoned monsters are boring, and I found myself more often simply using my rifle to shoot folks than any of the special skills that were given to me for my class. Later in the game, players are given a full squad of 4 Shadowrunners for any operation, which is nice, as it allows players to experience other classes without having to start from the beginning. What is unfortunate, however, is that across the board there generally seems very little difference between any of the classes rather than the short animations that they play to inflict bodily harm on each other, which I might add are pretty bad animations to begin with. Movement is an annoyance as well in combat. To attack, the player must click an enemy. Easy, right? Not so much. If clicked anywhere other than the giant red target that appears, which is around their feet, I found more often the game voted for moving my character to the square next to the target rather than attacking him, which not only wasted my turn but would put my characters into a dangerous position of being right next to an enemy unit. Not to mention the accuracy indicator seems more of a suggestion than an actual percentage. More often than I would like to admit, a 99% chance to hit would miss 3 shots consecutively. The best explanation I've found is that it doesn't factor in dodge until a shot is taken, but if that's the case, why show me my hit chance at all? With all that, the combat really is a simple click until you win setup. More often than not, it is easier to ignore cover and click until everything on screen dies, and once the disappointing combat is over, to try and forget the experience entirely. Ha! You thought you could get away from the tiles after everything was dead? Not a chance! Even after combat has ended, as long as you are within an operation that requires further combat down the road, you are forced to remain in the tile movement of combat. This means that if you clear an entire area, having had to march your operatives across a building, and the exit is on the opposite side, guess what? You still have to move using your action points, along the tiles, until you get there, and then exit your operatives one by one into the next area. This makes transitioning into new areas a huge chore, and several times, at the point where I would have had to backtrack to the beginning of a facility using the combat tile movement, I would just shut the game down. Hopefully, that when I came back, I would realize that what I had just witnessed was just a horrible nightmare. At least the story is decently written. The player is contacted by an old accomplice through a dead man's switch, which is basically a recording that is activated on his death to be sent to someone. The recording says that he has a life insurance policy with a huge payout, and it will be given to the player if they find out who murdered him and bring them to justice. So begins the adventure of our hero to bring down the elusive Emerald City Ripper, a serial killer who has been rampant in Seattle and little evidence has been found to bring him down. In all honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if the game would have been in black and white, and my character would adopt a trench coat, fedora, and a horrible drinking habit. The noir feeling was nice, if a bit overdone, and the overall story arcs and plot twists were decent enough. Overall, the decent story and beautifully painted world just aren't enough to pull Shadowrun returns from the bed of below average. The amount of time spent in the feeble combat scenarios, not because of the lack of being able to beat them, but because the mechanics don't allow you to progress at more than a snail's pace, makes the game feel far more like a chore than an enjoyable RPG experience. It also doesn't help that there is essentially no explanation on the use of other classes' abilities when the player gains access to more Shadowrunners, and I still have yet to figure out how to use a rigger's drones. The experience is frustrating. I wanted so badly to love Shadowrun, if for nothing else than being able to return to the world that captivated me when I was younger. It is unfortunate that its mechanics seem so dead set on keeping me from that age-old experience. And I hope that the upcoming mods for the reboot of the SNES version will also contain an overhaul for the combat system and some of the more frustrating parts of the game. Because if not, even the biggest and best mods won't save Shadowrun Returns from gathering dust in my Steam library, especially with games like XCOM Enemy Unknown still looming over it. All that said, Shadowrun Returns gets a 5 out of 10, and it is available on Steam now for $19.99. Until next time, cheers, and stay awesome.